welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. A senior Biden administration official says Washington is open to discussing risk reduction and sanctions with Pyongyang. Is Washington seeking a new breakthrough in the stalled talks with North Korea? What are South Korea's security options as tensions rise in the region? Today, we discuss these questions with former senior officials.
Security Council resolutions. They pose a threat to regional and international peace and security.
So there are valuable discussions that we can have with the DPRK on reducing the potential for military.
Идем вместе по избранному нами историческому пути.
In the studio with me, Ambassador James Jeffrey, chair of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. Ambassador Jeffrey was the special representative for Syria engagement and the special envoy for the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Ambassador Jeffrey also served as the deputy national security advisor during the George W. Bush administration. He was also the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Turkey, and to Albania. Also joining us, Ms. Mary Beth Long, a distinguished fellow at the Wilson Center. Ms. Long served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs and chairman of NATO's high-level group on nuclear issues. Ms. Long was an operations officer for the Central Intelligence Agency. Welcome to Washington Talk.
Thank you.
Now, Ambassador Jeffrey, senior official for DPRK, Chung Bak, said that Washington is open to discussing risk reduction and sanctions with North Korea. Now, this is the first time that the Biden administration raised the possibility of such talks. And this comes just weeks after senior Biden administration officials said that they will consider interim steps in denuclearizing North Korea. What signal is Washington giving to Pyongyang?
Not a good signal, in my view, first of all. This is a signal generated by the aggressive stance taken by the North Korean authorities, both in their weapons programs and their recent political decision to declare South Korea their number one enemy, as opposed to their long-term policy of, quote, peaceful reunification. Secondly, it's an election year, and clearly the Biden administration is looking at the crises it has to deal with, Gaza and Ukraine, in China, in the South China Sea and Taiwan, doesn't want yet another one. So they're trying to essentially buy off North Korea. In my view, having seen the Bush administration do this almost 20 years ago, I don't think this will work.
Ms. Long, is the Biden administration trying to calm unnecessary tensions? Some people say North Korea is not an election issue. What is your take?
Well, what is an election issue is, number one, minimizing the number of conflicts that a president or a potential presidential candidate is dealing with. And secondly, front and center is going to be whether the U.S. is perceived as being distracted and incapable with waning power and ability to project power. That is going to be front and center. And a component of that is going to be North Korea. And I think what you're hearing is early attempts by the Biden administration, early attempts by candidates to pick and choose, not to inflame unnecessarily some places where North Korea will be one of them, where there's not an immediate issue that we have to deal with as a political candidate. Focus on Gaza, focus on Taiwan, very likely, focus on ongoing conflicts by sending sort of signals along the public, but not at the presidential level, media, that we're not going to be looking for any trouble anytime soon. But as you know, this is tomfoolery in my world. We've been doing this with the North Koreans for decades. As Einstein said, insanity is repeating the very same acts and looking for a different result. Every election period we do this, And every election period, we're disappointed with Kim Jong-un's response.
Ms. Long, senior official for DPRK Jung Bak said that North Korea policy has not changed and denuclearization cannot happen overnight. An interim step has to come along the way. And what has been implicit is now only explicit.
Interim steps have been on the table since these negotiations began. And frankly, North Korea hasn't taken any of the opportunities for interim steps. And the policy, frankly, under Trump, and I think a wise policy was engagement with Kim Jong-un, but be very clear that there has to be change. There hasn't been change, so we backed off. I think inviting yet one more round of murky negotiations on sanctions and rewards for North Korean bad behavior is a big mistake.
Ambassador Jeffrey, when President Trump was pursuing diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, there were concerns that President Trump may make compromise and settle for a deal that would allow Kim Jong-un to keep his nuclear weapons. Now, if the Biden administration strikes a deal of interim step of sanctions relief, wouldn't the approaches be similar to what people were concerning about President Trump at the time?
First of all, if there actually would be some kind of deal, I don't think it would be related to what Trump did, because Trump basically said, you get all of these things if you complete denuclearization. That's different than interim steps. Interim steps is a fool's gold that is designed not to appeal to the North Koreans, because I don't think it will, but rather to the American electorate, or many Americans who follow foreign policy, who believe that the world thinks like us. The people in the U.S. administration who follow North Korea understand that regime well and know it doesn't fall for such tricks. But the real audience for these kind of let's try a partial step-by-step, but no, we're not going to really give up denuclearization, that's the American electorate. That's what this message is designed to, but it's dangerous because it could confuse North Korea.
Ambassador Jeffrey, you said interim step is different from what President Trump pursued at the time, but some Koreans are also concerned that President Trump, if he gets reelected, may also pursue arms control talks with North Korea. Former acting defense secretary Chris Miller, who is considered to be a candidate for defense secretary again, if there is another Trump administration for the second time, Secretary Miller said that North Korea nuclear issue is the genie out of the bottle. And he said, why not to the nuclear freeze for sanctions relief idea? Do you think future U.S. administration may go for arms control talks with North Korea?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't predict what a possible Trump administration or a second Biden administration will do. Time will tell. But I don't think that it is a good idea, nor do I think President Trump would pursue a interim step, because we have seen what happened. I worked on that closely with Secretary Rice and Chris Hill back in the 2000s. And what we saw was North Korea cheats. It accepts the sanctions relief, it accepts the talks, it accepts the higher status, but then we find it is pursuing other programs. There's no indication it will not do that. There's no indication it wants calm. There's no indication it wants stabilization. It wants de-escalation. It wants exactly the opposite for domestic political reasons. And again, President Biden understands this, but the people he's trying to get votes from don't, and expect him to make nice with people, and they think that they will make nice back. That's the problem. North Korea won't.
So you talk about your time at the White House during the George W. Bush administration when you were the Deputy National Security Advisor. In 2008, the six-party talks hit a snag because of the verification issues. How, even if North Korea agrees to a nuclear freeze and even implements that, is there any way the U.S. can fully verify North Korea's actions?
Well, we certainly couldn't then, because you remember they even blew up their plutonium reactor, but then we discovered at roughly the same time that they were pursuing secretly a enrichment program as another route to get nuclear capabilities. So I'm never against talking with an opponent, with a rival. That said, you have to be clear what your goals are. The goals with North Korea are complete nuclear disarmament. That should be the only thing on the table. And if they want to offer interim steps, we have to look very closely at them, but we should never give up that goal, not just rhetorically, but as a negotiating tool. The administration folks who you have been citing are saying that because that's, look, we write these policy points, but they mean nothing. Well, of course, we're still maintaining our long-term goal. Their real goal would be to get some kind of interim step that would mean nothing that they could point to as a diplomatic victory.
And the fact of the matter is, as Ambassador Jeffrey points out, there's zero indication from the North Koreans, much like its allies, China and Russia, that negotiations regarding reduction of weapons, types of weapons, number of weapons, the only time that has worked is post-Cold War with Russia and with our nuclear capabilities. And as you see, Putin is even walking those kinds of conversations back.
Ms. Long, for interim step deal, otherwise known as step-by-step deal, what actions should North Korea take to warrant some sanctions relief from the United States? President Trump walked away when Kim Jong-un only offered Yongbyon. So what plus would be acceptable for Washington?
Well, I can't read the mind of President Trump or President Biden or whoever we may have, but I can say that President Trump was 1,000% right. Walking away with that on the table was an insult, frankly. Whatever it is, we can talk for a long time about what that might look like, but it has to be an unequivocal commitment to return to the commitments that North Korea made when it entered into worldwide recognized weapons and other agreements, number one. Number two, it can't be something that he can turn on one day and turn off the others. It has to be a committed and an unequivocal commitment to be a responsible actor as to those commitments. Short of that, I don't see how we can possibly trust him.
Now, Ambassador Jeffrey, there is a speculation that if President Trump is reelected, U.S. forces Korea may be withdrawn and U.S. RK joint exercises may be downsized. Some also speculate that President Trump may tolerate South Korea getting its own nuclear weapons. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure that President Trump will withdraw troops from Korea or any place else. He talked a lot about that, but in the end, the only place he committed to withdraw was Afghanistan, and he didn't even do that himself. As we all know, it was done by the Biden administration. He talked about troops from Europe. He actually reinforced them. He talked about pulling troops out from Syria when I was on the Syria file. They're still there. And he's talked about various options with South Korea. But again, the troops are still there. We have to understand that those troops, not just in Korea, but all around the perimeter of the opponents of the global system, are designed to deter attack first on Korea or on NATO, Ukraine, other places, but also attack on us. And secondly, to keep these countries from obtaining their own nuclear weapons. That is a recipe for death and destruction for everyone. So therefore, this would be extremely unwise, and Trump would run into tremendous congressional and public opposition if he even opened the door to thoughts like this, I believe.
Ms. Long, North Korea conducted live fire drill of nuclear-capable super large multiple rocket launchers, and the drill also simulated aerial explosion. And Seoul said that this was an indication from Pyongyang that it could use tactical nuclear weapons. Now, are we headed into a situation where Seoul has to have its own nuclear weapons?
Well, really 2 points on that. If I were advising Kim Jong-un and I were looking and believing or hoping that the rest of the world saw this as my ability to use, willingness to use tactical nuclear weapons, I would ask him to step back and look at how far Putin has gotten with his threats of tactical nuclear weapons. The fact of the matter is Putin walked into his invasion of Ukraine with the largest, or certainly one of the largest, active duty militaries in the world, and he's still fighting how many years later? And he's still threatening tactical nuclear weapons, and Putin is still losing more people than he can possibly afford, and so many people that, frankly, none will be available if North Korea is thinking that maybe it's tucking itself up underneath Putin's nuclear umbrella. The second thing is, South Korea has the best nuclear umbrella that it can have right now, and that's with the United States. We are there, and we are committed, and there is no way the U.S. population is going to walk away from that. Now, whether at some point in time Korea makes a different decision, a domestic decision, and we have to adapt to enhance what is going on in the peninsula, or aspects of sharing responsibilities or shifting responsibilities. It's part of our bilateral and trilateral negotiation mechanisms. That's for another day. But as far as nuclear deterrent, I think South Korea should stand firm. I know the U.S. is going to stand firm, certainly in the short term, and that there should be confidence on the other side, or on the northern side, that there is a active deterrent with two countries standing up against Kim Jong-un together.
Ambassador Jeffrey, 60 years ago, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. was prepared for a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union placed nuclear-armed missiles on Cuba. The South Koreans have tactical nuclear weapons deployed near their border, literally on their heads. Do you think the sense of security threat that South Koreans are feeling right now are similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis what the Americans have felt then?
It's a very good question, and I can understand South Koreans from feeling that way, but there was a major difference. Our whole logic of deterrence of the Soviet Union and Europe was based upon our nuclear superiority. The Soviets had a very strong conventional superiority, tanks, artillery, troops. That's not the case on the Korean continent, because the South Koreans have a very large army, and more importantly, they can count on our troops. So we do not need a nuclear deterrent to stop a conventional attack. Our nuclear capabilities on the Korean Peninsula are designed to deter a North Korean use of nuclear weapons, as Secretary Long said, and as many presidents have said, our reaction will be immediate, overwhelming, and decisive. That is a commitment. We backed it up with a nuclear-armed submarine traveling to Korea just a few months ago. And I believe that it is a different situation. We have strong deterrent capability, assuming, one, the troops stay and this nuclear commitment remains.
Ms. Long, U.S. Forces Korea Commander General Paul DeCamara said that his thinking on North Korean weapons, nuclear weapons, has changed. Previously, the focus was on preventing North Korea from further developing its nuclear program, and now the focus is on preventing North Korea from using its weapons. Now, is the U.S. backing away from the nuclear red line drawn to North Korea? Will the United States continue to retreat as North Korea continues to sophisticate its nuclear weapons?
3 points on that. During an election year, a lot of people think out loud. We've seen a number of administration officials that are floating the idea of, maybe us being a little softer on North Korea, certainly through the election period. I think this is, second point, a general who's thinking out loud. Our policy is, and as far as I know, will remain a red line with the nuclearization of North Korea. That a commander is thinking about contingencies, thinking about what he might do. If that is adjusted over time for whatever reason, is something that he's responsible for. Probably not something that he should be articulating, certainly at a time like this when everyone's hypersensitive. But I think that, look, everything should be on the table as far as what we're considering. And I think a lot of the steps, are we going to, what's far enough, what's too far as far as what North Korea does or will do? But at the end of the day, the policy, as far as I'm aware, has not changed. We have a red line, and I don't think it's going to change, despite the fact that you'll hear chirping during the election period. That's politics, that's not policy.
Ambassador Jeffrey, you know General DeCamara very well. Why do you think he made this comment?
Well, first of all, he's a great general. We served together in Syria. Let me explain two of my points to go along with her three. First, DeCamara's mission as commander of the joint forces in Korea is not to get North Korea to demilitarize. That's a policy level. It is to deter a North Korean attack, and he's very effective at doing that. Now, what he is talking about with his quote, positive for positive, we can get on a better footing. I saw him do exactly that daily with the Russians who we were bumping up against in Syria. Deconfliction, reducing tensions, having a hotline if there is any kind of problem. Any military commander would want that because they don't want to stumble into a war.
That's his job. Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry.
if North Korea is willing to go along with that, that's okay, but that's minor and tactical and military. It has nothing to do with interim steps towards denuclearization that administration officials are talking about, and it is totally separate from both the deterrence mission and the red line, as Mary Beth Long said, of total denuclearization.
Wow, Ambassador Jeffrey, Ms. Long, and General Camera all worked on all these global issues throughout your career. That's very impressive, yes. Ambassador Jeffrey, Putin won a 5th term in office. How would the current geopolitical landscape of U.S., South Korea, Japan cooperation, and Russia, China, North Korea nexus change, if at all, depending on the outcomes of the U.S. presidential elections?
My hope is that it will not change because the strategic environment will not change. This strategic environment laid out in the Biden administration's 2022 National Security Statement, which echoes what Trump put out when he was president, is that we and all of our friends and allies around the world are facing a global competition to shape the future of the international order. This is great power competition. We have to deter and contain these opponents. That is fundamental to the kind of world we live in. Donald Trump can't change that. Joe Biden can't change that. And Vladimir Putin and President Xi can change it only by changing their overarching policies.
Ms. Long, just lastly, Putin said that North Korea has its own nuclear umbrella. How does that comment impact the Korean Peninsula security situation? And how do you see Putin's 5th term in office would impact the geopolitics surrounding the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I think he intended it in one of two ways, to imply that Russia was part of that nuclear umbrella, whether through indirect support to North Korea or political and other support, which frankly, I have to say, if I were Kim Jong-un, I would be like, wait a second, you've been threatening nuclear weapons for the better part of how many decades? You've been threatening them over Ukraine. You're stuck in Ukraine. You're so desperate to continue the conventional war in Ukraine that you're emptying your prisons. And yet we've gone a couple of years with basically no real resolution, no real progress by the Russians on what they really want. I would take that assurance from Putin with a little bit of salt if I were Kim Jong-un. For that Putin would give one vote in Russia for helping North Korea in a conflict is laughable. So if I were Kim Jong-un, I would be much braver than that, frankly. And rather than threaten nuclear weapons, I would go for the goal of having my people eat every day and be the hero, frankly, of the peninsula, one of the heroes of the region, and stop, take a knee, and direct all of this effort towards making the Korean peninsula peaceful by first starting with everybody eating 3 meals a day, whatever they want in his own backyard. And I think in that case, the Russians, the Americans, the Chinese, everybody would say, we're on board with that effort, and it would change like that. That's the brave thing to do.
Well, with that policy recommendation to Kim Jong-un, we'll wrap up our discussion here. Ambassador Jeffrey, Ms. Long, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.